Today's topic is hood healing is family healing. It is my pleasure to share with you Vee L. Harrison. She is an award-winning journalist from Chicago. Her work appears in publications across the city covering and highlighting Black culture and community news. Harrison is a Chicago change agent, setting the stage for new voices in Black media. During the course of her career as a journalist, she covered the city's social structure through the lens of a Black woman raised in the city's largest, poorest community on the West Side during 1990s. Directly after receiving her BA from Columbia College, she served as a journalism instructor for inner city youth in Chicago, promoting news literacy and Black owned media. Harrison has spoken to over a dozen audiences across the nation, and we are super excited to invite her and to have her here with us, speaking to us on today about her new book, Hood Healing. And I am going to turn it over to V. Take it away, V.
I am just so honored to be here. Thank you for that introduction, Sarita. I appreciate you and your team over at Be Strong Families and everyone that decided to spend their lunch break with me. I hope you're eating something good. I ate right before this, and I'm super happy to be a part of this messaging. I know that it will resonate with everyone here. You're here because you are an advocate for family. And you are here because in some cases, in the weirdest spaces, we learn. And I am here to not only teach you about my book and educate you all about the writing process of that, but the strength and the healing that is coming from my book and transferring over to my actual life. So, hi, if you are here and you're using the chat box, just say to me, hey, V. Hey, V. It's with two E's, VEE. I'll give you a minute. Hey, V. I want to know who's here. Talk to me. I see where you guys are all coming from. I love it. Hey, Rebecca, Kristen. Hey, Sarita, Crystal, Raquel. Hey, Vanita. Hey, Vanessa. I got a baby sister named Vanessa. Hey. You guys are there. That's what I want to know. You're alive. Because I want you up and ready for this message. So let me share this with you. I've known since I was only 8 years old that I was a writer. I was full of stories. I grew up in inner city Chicago, and some of you who are from Chicago and reporting from Chicago, if you know anything about the city, you know that there are stories all around us. One very common thread about these stories is the trauma that's linked to these stories. And throughout my life as a youngster, growing up Black, in a house with a very traditional concept that we don't talk about what happened in our house. And don't talk about what happened between mom and daddy. That's nobody's business. And what happens between these walls and in this house stays between these walls and in this house. If you know what I'm talking about, just be like, yep, in the chat box. Yep. If you've lived in an adulthood and in a childhood where it was, don't talk about what happened in our house, and you can feel that, say, yep, all right, y'all know what I'm talking about. With that concept and that upbringing, all right, growing up with Black parents, growing up with grandparents from the South, talking about your trauma is very taboo and almost not even existent in the Black communities. So I knew that I had all these stories around me growing up in inner city Chicago, but I also knew that there were things that you just don't talk about on the outside of your house, right? So the thing about trauma in Black inner city families, Chicago and all over, Philly just signed in. Hey, Rhonda from Philly, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Detroit. The thing about growing up Black and sharing your trauma publicly is very much not allowed. It's very much not normal. All right. I want to share with you all how that becomes an issue in working through your trauma. And then how that can sometimes seep through our families. And we pass on the trauma of not talking about our trauma. So, number one, growing up with all these stories around me, I knew that I wanted to write about them, right? Growing up around inner city people and things and places and workers and drug fiends and sometimes hookers on the block that I grew up in. There were things all around me that were stories. So what I decided as a journalist was that I'll become a community journalist who covered the city. There's no best way of being nosy and learning how to share those stories without being, don't tell those stories, don't share your business. I thought that journalism would be a great outlet for me. I went to Columbia College where I took up journalism. And as a journalist in Chicago, I was able to, through my own lens as someone who grew up in the city, talk about things in a very different way. Not in the way that a politician would talk about them, but in a way that someone who actually was raised on the west side of Chicago, as I was, would talk about those things. Trauma is a very pressing subject, however, because it's a part of almost every topic, but it's a part that we often ignore and bury. When we repress that trauma, it plays out in our neighborhoods and it plays out in our households. Things that play out in our households obviously impact our family. I decided after graduating college, being a community writer, working for several papers and magazines, Chicago Sun-Times, I wrote for Ebony magazine. I decided that I wanted to share a piece of my storytelling in a very different and more magical way, right? So I wrote my very first book, Hood Healing. Hood Healing is, as my very first book project, I would say my life's work. What this book does is it shares very raw and very honestly how trauma plays out in inner city and Black lives, right? So many of us who don't share our stories sometimes grow old with our trauma. So many of us who grew up with a grandma like I did, or grew up with parents that told me, don't talk about what's happening in this house, have never really learned how to handle their trauma, their past pain. Hood Healing features a foreword written by MTV's Donald T. Pungo. Donald T is the show host of True Life Crime on MTV, and he also does things, the award shows on the MTV station and other news segments. But he and I joined together with other journalists from Chicago to talk about how is it that we tell stories as a living, but we still never really share our own stories growing up in traumatized Chicago. Hood Healing is not only an ode to the city, it is a love letter to Chicago. It is a hate letter to Chicago. That is because it took Chicago, my only brother, from me last year. This time last year, my only brother was murdered on the west side of Chicago. 10 bullets, broad daylight, February 7th, Super Bowl Sunday. Left cold in the snow. And Chicago Police Department is yet to share answers with my family. We know very little. And so I'm saying that to say that type of trauma lives in families for a long time. And because we grow up in inner city situations and circumstances and upbringing, we don't often share these types of stories. Until now. I said that Hood Healing would be an outlet for us to talk about the things that we've experienced, that we've been neglecting to talk about in our lifetime. I share in my story, also featuring my own mother, growing up with a drug addicted dad, witnessing molestation in my own home. Evan Moore, he's a former Chicago Sun-Times reporter, and now he's the press secretary for Chicago Public Schools. He too is featured in Hood Healing. Evan talks about growing up on the south side of Chicago and learning that no matter what, he was just a Black man. Evan said, and I'll quote him in the book, despite the amount of degrees and having a master's and being an author and an award-winning journalist, when he walks outside in Chicago, he is a threat. These are the types of traumatizations that we never even consider that we wake up with every day. Thank you so much for your condolences in the chat box. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. My brother was a driving force of this book. I want to read to you all, firstly, my foreword, and who I dedicated this book to, because I believe that the foreword is a very good summary of what's to come in the book. And this is not the foreword, my dedication. So I say in my dedication, this art is for my ancestors, those I knew and to those I've yet to meet. Grandma Shirley and Scooter, who both spoke clear as day to me while writing this. And to my Angelou, Toni Morrison, Walter D. Myers, Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Marcus Garvey, Ida B. Wells, James Baldwin, Congressman John Lewis, Tupac Shakur, DMX, Sandra Bland, Laquan McDonald, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and George Floyd. I feel and hear all of you deeply in the wind, sun, air, and in my soul. And so Hood Healing is an ode to my ancestors, really because it is the healing that we are trying to achieve from our ancestral pain. Black people in Chicago is suffering trauma that runs as deep as 1619, which is the year that slaves were taken out of Africa and brought to America. Years of that. 1619 was the year that slaves were brought to this country. And so growing up Black and having that be a part of you and being a part of a lineage that never healed that pain, we wonder why we're seeing so much violence on the streets of Chicago. We wonder why our young children are drug abusing and wanting to be numb. Why so many mothers are struggling as single mothers or even in a marriage, raising their children. That is because the trauma has constantly been passed down, literally and figuratively, through the blood. I'm going to stop here and ask you this. If you've experienced trauma, just type in the inbox me. And I know that we all have different looking trauma, but if you've experienced trauma, just type in the inbox me. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you. Yes, Portia, Rebecca, Vanessa. Yes, Aaron. You've all experienced trauma. My daughter's in the background. Excuse us. If you've experienced trauma and you've lived through trauma, then you can relate to Hood Healing. What Hood Healing has done is made talking about those things that Mama said don't talk about to other people a thing. It's time. And this isn't just a Black thing. I want to stress that as I share this book with my white colleagues and my Asian friends and my Indian neighbors, they're like, yeah, me. Just like Clara, Jasmine coming in, Maryland, they've experienced trauma too. They too have grew up in systems and customs and upbringing that has made talking about your trauma taboo. It's happened to all of us. And we're just walking around and we are our ancestors' trauma. Now you think about that. Centuries later, we are our ancestors' trauma. So when you wake up in your own lifetime, you are still waking up with the pain of someone brought over on slave ships, bound by ankles, beaten and abused, raped. These things have seeped into our families. These things are our families. But this is Be Strong Families. And so I'm in the right place because Hood Healing is about healing our hood through healing ourselves, healing our families, and then healing our communities. And so there's no way we can talk about community until we go inside of those houses and we go inside of those families and we talk about the pain that we were taught not to talk about. Now, I'll ask one more thing. If you've kept your trauma a secret, say me. Say me. Let me type in me. I've kept my trauma a secret for years. Rhonda kept her trauma a secret. Keep typing me. Keep typing me. Yep. Cat. Yep. I knew it wasn't it. And Portia said me until recently. Same here. 35 years old, talking about things that I didn't even know I was even able to talk about in public. I want to read to you now the feature, chapter 3, where my mother is featured in the book. So I heard early on that my dad was drug addicted. And I heard early on that our family wasn't perfect. We had people with various issues. I heard this early on. And growing up Black or growing up, period, we know that there's variation to the type of people that are in your family. But my mom shared some very private things, and I want to talk to you all about it. I'm going to start reading chapter 18 and a little bit of this interview in Hood Healing between my mother and I. Her name is Sandra Harrison. She's a longtime Chicago resident. She raised us on the west side of Chicago. And as I mentioned just very recently, she became a victim of the violence by losing her only son, my only brother. So I'll start, and this is my narrative before getting to the interview. Passing down family trauma in the hood most times goes unseen, because in most cases, we don't realize that our own families are creating trauma all around us. Most residents of Chicago don't consider that to be what's happening on the streets. I felt like the older I got, the harder it was to understand the trauma and where it all began. Inside of my own home, it was an obvious place to begin. However, my mama did such a good job at making the trauma we experienced look all right. Most times, she skillfully dressed up my family's trauma. The trauma I wore was always dressed to the nines. No one could tell that the trauma my siblings and I wore was from the Goodwill and Salvation Army stores. The walls inside of my Chicago home only expanded the trauma that was trapped inside of me. My siblings and I mainly had one another, and not so much recreation of our own. And when you're with your siblings all the time, they become enemies and then homies again by nighttime. We define family as the people that lived in the house with us. In our community, that could be our cousins, homeless uncles, aunts, displaced friends, evicted children. You could say that our house was pretty cramped. For me, it felt like what I imagined the living quarters on a slave ship to be. Housing in Chicago is yet another root and leaf to Black trauma. In the early 1960s, the inner city housing projects were reminiscent of revamped slave ships, only this time with concrete walls, roaches, and daily domestic disputes. Black people in Chicago were once again metaphorically piled up on top of one another, but as distant from one another as any other ethnic group, or so it seemed. Even in the smallest confined, filthy places, these conditions were a setup for trauma to seep through the cracks and spill over into our family's bloodline. That's because with Black people, trauma is in our blood. I want to stop and talk about that. Trauma being in our blood and passing it down, and this very real concept around that. So growing up, like the majority of my friends, all of my siblings, cousins, co-workers who laugh and talk about this, I got whoopings. I got whoopings because growing up in a Black household, or growing up usually in that upbringing, if you do something wrong and you're reprimanded, you may get a timeout with a Black mama. You may get reprimanded and get that eye. You know the eye. Everybody know that eye your mama will give you. But it was very normal to grow up getting physically spanked for wrongdoings, right? I grew up thinking, as my mother grew up thinking, that spankings, whoopings, whatever you shall call them, were the way of handling discipline. I then gave birth to my very first child. She's 14 in just a week. Her name is Sarah. Thinking that when Sarah did something wrong, by the time she was 4 and 5, spanking her on the leg, spanking her with a belt, that was normalcy for me. It's what I received. It is what my mother received. And is what my mothers received, who was a slave. And so we learn these patterns in our families, and we learn them to be true and to be correct, and we pass them down without not clearly having an understanding of the origin of this behavior or knowing where this all even started. So most studies have recently shown, and most surveys have actually been conducted, saying that a lot of parents in new generations refuse to spank their children physically, and they would rather handle discipline in a different way. Now, why is that important? I think that's important for several reasons, but I'll talk personally for me. And even my mother admits to this, is that what Maya Angelou would always say: when you know better, you just do better. My mother say all the time, and I know it's a fact because I live this way. I didn't know what I know now. And if I knew what I knew then, I would have parented completely different. I'm parenting in a new way and literally brave enough to break generational curses, is what I would call it, because I'm realizing that the origin of spanking is something that oppressed my people. And again, trauma seeping through the bloodline is a literal fact in growing up in inner city Chicago. And so here with Be Strong Family, something that I really want to stress is that you can do better when you know better. It sounds like the most simple concept, but it is not. It is very brave and hard to say that I'm going to do it different than what my mama did. You want to know why? Because why would you want to offend your mother in thinking that she didn't do it the right way? Or why would you step out of a comfort zone? Because being uncomfortable, no one likes that. But it takes bravery and knowledge to do better when you know better. And we can start healing the traumas in our family by educating ourselves on where that trauma began. That was heavy. I'm going to say that again. We can start healing the traumas in our families through educating ourselves about where that trauma began. That trauma began on slave ships. That trauma began with my great-great-great-grandmother being raped all day sometimes, all day. Babies being snatched out of her arm directly after birth. That's trauma. These are things that we aren't taught in schools. So let's talk about that. Right now, there's this huge argument and combat, if you will, that certain things should not be taught to our young people. They may make young people uncomfortable. There are things that we are saying that we shouldn't teach them because the curriculum could cause white guilt. So we are literally banning books, taking curriculum out of schools, and telling families, we're not going to teach your children that. It might be too uncomfortable. So what we're saying to families, see, I'm stressing that word. What we're saying to our families is that the truth is so uncomfortable about this country that we better not tell it. Hood healing tells it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Because truth is, the traumas that are playing out in our families, that's not new trauma. That's great grandma's trauma. That's great grandma's separation and domestic relationship. Those are things that are brewing on the inside of us that were never healed from our ancestors. And if you have never realized the true pain, read about the true pain, I'm not talking a Netflix documentary. All right. Big ups to Netflix. I love Netflix. And I'm not talking about a WTTW special. Shout out to WTTW. They know I love them. I'm talking about educating yourselves, talking to your elders, reading your history about the true trauma that our ancestors died over. Until you educate yourself on that, you will not be able to start healing yourself and understanding your trauma. I know that's heavy, but it's real. It's very real. Also featured in the book, Emmy Award-winning Gerard Mcclendon. Gerard Mcclendon is somebody that I watched grow up telling the news. He was on PBS. He had a show on WTTW. He was someone that I admired, Black journalist that reminded me of my dad. They had the same hairdo back in the 80s, 90s. And he was my source of news. So him being featured in my book and endorsing my book and this message means the world to me. He also wrote books, recently one on Kanye's mother, Donda's Rules, where he interviews Kanye West's mother. He also wrote a book on President Trump's presidency. Interesting. And that book is called President Thug. Gerard Mcclendon is a journalism mastermind. And in my book, Hood Healing, Gerard talks about the trash, the literal trash on the grounds of the west side and south sides of Chicago, the blight in inner city Chicago, the neglect of that trash. When he talked about that and we interviewed about the book and for the book, it was so interesting hearing that because, again, I grew up on the west side. It was very normal to step out on the porch and then go down the street to my friend's house and step on Cheeto bags, Swisher blunt wrappers, water bottles, liquor bottles. We couldn't even really play in our park without our parents' permission because sometimes there were heroin needles in our park and in our portable phone booths growing up on the west side of Chicago. And so when you grow up around these types of things and you're raising your children and you're promoting healthy families, strong families, that type of trauma from their environment and their neighborhood seeps into their lives. It says to you that Oak Park is only 3 minutes away from where I live, and Oak Park doesn't look like that. That my friends get to walk into a nice park with mulch and planted trees and daisies and a swing set, yet my swing is falling down. And there's cognac bottles in the play yard. And that says to me at a very young age, and it said to me at nearly 8 years old, those stories I told you about earlier. It said to me, am I not good enough? I don't deserve a nice park, a Jewel Osco. I only deserve a convenience store. In the course of my 12 years as a journalist, I've probably covered more than 3 times the closure of grocery stores in Chicago, inner city, the closure or the removal of schools in the city, the closure and removal of mental health facilities in the city. All of these absolute necessities are taken away. And so to have a strong family in an environment that takes from you your necessities, it almost seems impossible. I want you to type your honest to God answer to this question in the chat box. Do you get from your community what you need to have a strong family? Be as honest as you can. If you don't know, just say you don't know. Yes or no in the chat box. Do you get from your community? All of you are from different areas. Do you get from your community what you need to have a strong family, to raise a strong family? I'll type my answer. And some no's. I'm seeing some yeses. Interesting. Definitely not from the community that I grew up in, says Rochelle. Rebecca doesn't know. My answer is sometimes, and it depends. You know, and sometimes when grant funding is allocated appropriately, which is very rare in Chicago, maybe a program will pop up. Maybe a program will pop up at a school. Very rare. These are honest answers. Thank you for being honest. This is where the healing starts. Because when we know what we're not getting, we know what to fight for. As a journalist, especially as a Black journalist who grew up in these areas that I write about, I take this so personal. And in so many cases, white reporters or reporters from other areas of the country, the city, the state, they parachute into our communities and they tell us what we need. They write their articles and they tell us what we should do. They have all these solutions, but they don't know how we're living. They don't know what we're going through. They don't know why we mourn. They don't know. I'm here to tell you that it's time for us to tell our own stories. That is the strength that we put back in our hoods. That is the strength that transfers back into our families.
Vee, can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Sarita.
I think I was wondering about what was your personal healing? What was your personal journey to healing like? And what did that include?
You're just gonna put me on the spot.
I was just thinking
That's
about it. I
a
was listening to you
great
talk about
one.
it.
Oh my God, that's a great question. So there are so many things I did right until I figured out, or I did wrong until I figured out how to do right. There are so many things that I'm not that made me what I am. I was an abuser in a relationship, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was hitting my boyfriend. I didn't know why I was so jealous
Mm-hmm.
and possessive and seeking attention and control. There were things that played out in my household that my own mother hadn't healed from her household.
Mm-hmm.
We have generations of pain playing out, and we don't even know why. I'm landing myself in jail while I'm simultaneously in college, a community leader. Oh my God. There were so many things I was doing wrong, and I had no idea why I was in pain like that. I'm like, wait a minute. I got a 2-parent home. My mom and my daddy are working. My parents care about me. We eat every night. Daddy comes home. I'm not getting abused. I'm dressed in clean clothes. I thought I was fine. That was the standard of being okay. We were clean. We were fed. Our hair was pressed. We were fine. So I thought.
Yeah.
And then I got into relationships, Sarita. And I didn't realize I was so possessive. I didn't realize that I was dealing with trauma from my own household. I didn't realize that my mama was, and that she was raising me in that trauma. And again, you don't know better until you do better, and you can't do better until you know better. And so here I am years later after jail time, a custody battle, and losing my oldest daughter out of my home for a whooping. 5 children later. These are things that I spoke of and couldn't speak of because of shame, guilt, people talking about me, jobs firing me, my children hating me. These are things we're not taught to discuss. Yeah. And in Hood Healing, I go there and some. And so do the contributors of Hood Healing. And I'm just forever grateful that, thank you for that question, that I was able to come out on the side of this trauma and start a journey of healing. There's this misconception since I've written this book. I've talked about this during interviews, and I've talked about this even with the contributors of the book, that now I'm the guru of healing and I'm all right. I've been healed. No, no, no. I am just at the brink of understanding this stuff. That's why I was itching to share it.
Yeah.
And so many of us, like my brother, we move on to the next realm without ever solving our trauma. And so the heart pain in that are the 5 children that he left behind.
Wow.
In trauma. You guys see where I'm going with this? Someone said, thank you for your honesty and your candor. Healing is a lifelong process. Yes, Portia. Thank you so much, Kathy. She said sometimes, and it depends. But the better answer than yes for me, U.S. policy and way of life in general is not generally family supportive. Talk about that in Hood Healing. I'll say this. Shout out to Dina Chapman, the editor of my book and the owner of Precision Editing LLC. And shout out to my publisher, Kathy Lahr, who is the owner of Thought Collection Publishing, because those 2 women challenged me to not just write about this trauma, which took a while. Now, mind you, this book started before I lost my brother. It was one of the last things we talked about. I had to do it. But understand that with the push of my editor and my publisher, I didn't just have a necessity to tell the stories. It was the necessity to talk solutions. Super important. And for me talking about those solutions, we're healing. And just the of that, it's just the tip of that iceberg of healing. And if we get ourselves to a place where we can talk about it comfortably, we're healing somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know this. No, what were you saying, Sarita?
No, I was just going to say that sounds, that's one of the reasons why we love and do, love cafes and do
Mm-hmm.
cafes, because we know that in sharing, there's healing and it gives other people permission to share. I heard you talking about solutions, and so I wanted to know what were some of the solutions.
A great question. Thank you for asking. One of them were to hold ourselves accountable as Black people. It's time. It is not the white man that has brought us down, and we have to retrain our minds. Absolutely, things happened in the past that involved other cultures and other walks of life that we are healing from. But if we rethink and change the narrative of what we need to do to control this, we can get something done. The blame game is done with. What are we doing as inner city Black and brown people? What are our local politicians doing? Are we going out and talking to our aldermen? Are we really making those moves, or are we just complaining?
Mm-hmm.
Holding ourselves accountable, holding our education system accountable. Those are the paths to healing. Getting actual organization off of the ground, organizing as the Black Panther Party did. And see, here's the thing. Street gangs in the 80s and 90s made an attempt to do this, and then they got a bad rep. They got a bad rep because, truth be told, there was no need for us to organize. So they wanted us to think. So they began to say that gangs were violent. And so the history became the reality. Gangs became more and less about family and more about danger, a threat to our neighborhoods, right? And gangs very much so in inner city life go down on me in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about those solutions and how hood healing was a big, not just talk about it, but be about it process.
Yeah.
There are solutions to this. And I tell people this book is just a catalyst and a conversation starter. Because more importantly, it is a guide and a few answers to what we can do. There's a leg that I'm doing that's part of this book and its marketing that I'm calling Operation Heal the Hood. And in Operation Heal the Hood, I'm not writing about it, I'm being about it. I'm working with local state rep, currently working with Illinois State Rep LaShawn K. Ford on the west side of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And Rep Ford and I on Valentine's Day were at Cook County Jail talking about my book and talking about trauma and healing within families. A lot of those women were mothers. It was a group of 10 women. A lot of those women were mothers. Several of those women were in there for quite some time with no future out. These are the types of things that we need to do to create solutions, transforming minds, changing the narrative. Also, my role as a Black journalist in changing the narrative of Chicago coverage is so important to me. Because so often when we turn on the TV as Black people, Hispanic people, who do we see doing wrong? Who do we see as the victims losing their sons, daughters, nieces, uncles, grandchildren? Black and brown. Changing the narrative of how our communities and how our people is covered is so important. Creating that. Yes, Sarita.
You made me think of two things. One, you made me think of when you were talking about you're 3 minutes away, right? Oak Park being 3 minutes away from Chicago. And I remember growing up and wondering why on 35th and 35th Street, on the south side, you had on the east side, you had African American community at the hood, and it looks totally different. But if you go on the other side, it's primarily white. And I would think all the time, well, how is this happening? Like, what's
happening?
It's only only a block. But then there's police presence, which wasn't in our neighborhood. There was police presence and things like that. And that just made me think about that. And then the other piece was the other piece I was thinking about as you were talking is how brave you were to be able to share about your brother, especially when you're in. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And um and I had another thought and I think I lost it, but it was in regards to what you were what you were talking about. Hopefully it'll come back. This is
Okay,
what happens
sure.
when you get like 50. Hopefully it'll
Happens to me, and
hopefully
I'm
it'll
not
come back because it was a really good. Oh, I guess I want to know what is your is you've been talking to the different contributors that help with the book.
Mhm.
Were there any um we call them aha moments? Were there things you discovered that you didn't know as you were doing this book? Were there some aha moments like, oh, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about, this is new.
Oh my God, what a question. Thank you for that. For me, the entire book, I felt like I didn't know myself a little bit.
Mm,
I felt like some of the information I was sharing was so new to me
mm-hmm.
that I was rediscovering Veronica.
Wow.
Also, this idea about journalists and us being on TV and being the names behind all of these top publications, I didn't know so many of my fellow journalists shared so much of that pain and
Mm-hmm.
wasn't telling it. We are queen and kings of telling everybody else stories, but
Yeah.
so many of them were like, oh my God, I never talked about this.
Yeah.
Gerard Mcclendon, again, Emmy Award winning journalist, shares how he lost his parents to a home invasion and a murder. And seconds before going on to his show on PBS, he learned that both of his parents were murdered seconds
Mm-hmm.
before going on the air. Later on, finding out that they discovered who murdered his parents. How do you heal from that? How do you forgive? Gerard has forgiven him. How do you heal from those things? And so, talking about them, even years later with me for hood
Mm-hmm.
healing, he said, this is really healing, Vee. I've never
I,
talked about it in this way. I've talked
I
about it
did.
to the press,
Mm-hmm.
talked about it to local law enforcement. I
Yeah.
never talked about it to somebody that really was empathizing with the trauma
Mm.
that I'm walking around with. That meant so much to me. To someone that's 25 years older than me, that meant so much to me.
I did read that in the book. Are do most of the contributors in the book have trauma? Have
Yes,
experienced trauma?
every contributor in the book. Dr. Tanya Sorrell, I would say, serves a different purpose. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
share her story in that way, but she did come as a doctor from Rush University. Dr. Tanya Sorrell is a professor, psychology department. And she shared the psychological and psychiatric impacts of the trauma, literally the impact on our brain, the impact on our hearts. How when Black people grieve, there's very little places to lay that grief. There's not the mental health facility resources in our communities like there are others. There's some, but very few. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's not many places to lay our burdens down. And we
Mm-hmm.
raise our kids with them. We go to our jobs with those burdens. We enter our romantic relationships with those traumatic burdens. We enter webinars with those burdens. You don't lay those burdens down because growing up in communities that don't have what you need, it's hard. And so
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Sorrell connects that psychological and psychiatric impact to how the trauma continues. I got beat, I'm beating my kid, my kid's gonna do what? It really isn't rocket science.
Yeah.
You guys, I just got that 10-minute cue. I really would love to take questions before wrapping up because I know I talk too much. It's my thing. So please, if we can get a few in, I would love to.
And guys, you can raise your hand and we'll bring you on if you'd like to be brought on, or you can just type your question in the chat and then I'll read it for you if you prefer to do that way.
You got it. Whatever you guys want.
I did. I had this is so interesting to me. You're making me think of so many things.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Mine is just turned. I can't write down the questions enough. Can you talk a little bit more about Operation Healing the Hood?
Absolutely.
Because I think that
Operation,
jarred something for me. Hmm.
oh, absolutely. Operation Healing the Hood will be my series of initiatives, pilot programs, events that I will put on across the city of Chicago as action items that I brought up in the book Hood Healing. And yeah, the conversation is deep and the book talks are important and the book signings feel great, but it's time to do something. And I'm about that life. Operation Healing the Hood is the action behind Hood Healing. Well, we've got some
So
stuff happening.
Kathy said when Sarita was asking you about your healing journey, it sounded like relationships were the catalyst. Can
Hmm.
you tell a story about how you came to understand that you could or had to do something different in your personal life?
The
Thank
moment
you,
I lost.
Kathy.
Thank you so much for that,
And that's our
Kathy.
CEO.
Hey, Miss CEO. Thank you so much for being here. I think that pivotal moment was when I began to recognize the abuse that I was giving to a former boyfriend. And then we had a baby, my very firstborn, abuse to her. When I started realizing that I wasn't sure what was wrong with me, but I was putting it off on other people, I knew that it was time to make a change.
Mm,
I wasn't sure why.
yeah.
Sorry for your loss too, Anita. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for your openness. Jasmine,
Jasmine said, yeah, share if any coping skills to best manage these emotions. This was a great conversation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. Share if any coping skills to best manage these emotions.
that's a great, great question. And I am a yogi. About 6 or 7 years, I picked up yoga, which for me isn't so much a cultural or religious thing. It's not parallel to my culture at all. However, it's something that has taught me meditation and self awareness and creating space for peace. Those things are very much taboo and weird and white people things when you grow up black. Practicing our self-healing and self-awareness as black people has been something that we haven't been super comfortable with. You get clowned and talked about if you say you're going to therapy. It's just not nothing that we normalize, but I'm normalizing it. I definitely recommend therapeutic exercises, seeing a therapist if you're experiencing deep trauma, mentorships with people, creating self awareness mechanisms where you know when you're triggered and you learn how to deal with that. Oh my God, I saw something on the news about someone being shot and killed. That triggered me. What do I do with that trigger? How do I work on that pain? How do I get comfortable in that again? Someone said earlier, I'm sorry, I forgot who you were, that it's a lifelong healing process. It is. It's a lifelong process.
Vanita said, can you do, and thank you, Jasmine and Kathy, for your
Yes, I'm reading
questions.
Anita.
Vanita said, can you do a part two on hood healing?
Everyone is asking for that. So my sequel to Hood Healing, I will say this, and I won't say any more than it, is that it's really going to be about the action and going more into what we should be doing and what we will be doing in the hood to heal it. Thank you for that, Vanita. Sneaking that little sneak peek in. Thanks for that. And I promise
Any other?
I'll post it.
I'm sorry, any other questions? We have about, I think we can take maybe two more questions
Okay.
before we begin to wrap up. So if anyone wants to come on, or if you want to ask V another question while
Happy
we
to take it.
first she wraps up.
You guys were great. Thank you for receiving the honesty. It gets very uncomfortable, but when you have people that are thankful for that, that means a lot.
Janelle says she'd like to hear more about hood healing, but I had another question.
Of course.
I know I started reading the book, and I know that it talks a lot about trauma, and I love when you said it was a love letter and a hate letter to
Yeah.
Chicago. And so it made me think, what what good did you find in your community that sort of counteracted
Mm.
the bad? And if there was, I also grew up in African American. I grew up in the hood,
Mm-hmm.
and my hood sounds a little bit different from yours. However, um, there the there were a lot of great things in my community too, and so I'm wondering what great things were in your community.
Oh, God. There are great programs. There are great mental health facility places. Encompass Center on the West Side. There are politicians that really care. There are people that are aware of what needs to happen. Unfortunately, it's just a lack of resources and support. So people pull together these small non-for-profits and
Mhm.
these small organizations, and they do that because they really believe in their hood, and they should, right? And so there is good in the hood. It
Mhm.
really is. It's people that care. There are strong families that are going to be legacy families. I talk about legacy families in my book. Those are the families that's going to leave behind that neighborhood legacy of help
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
healing and kill away that trauma and those generational curses. So there's plenty of good organizations and supporters and leaders that we have to give their due credit. They're
Yeah.
out.
Thank you. Aaron said, can you discuss anything you found specific to Chicago?
Absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you for that question. Really quick, Aaron. Chicago Police Department was recently ranked as the second worst department in the entire country. That
Whoa.
shocked me because growing up in Chicago, inner city, where the police patrolled our neighborhoods and our blocks so heavy, I thought they were mass in numbers. And so they had to be doing some good out there. So I found specifically the lack of care and support from our local law enforcement. And that too is something, an action item that I'll be working with other coalitions on across the city of Chicago. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, V. So, guys, we're closing out our webinar, and we always like to find something positive to amplify.
I
So,
love it.
today, our hashtag is going to be hashtag amplify hood healing.
Hey,
And if you can think of something from today's conversation that you'd like to amplify, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'd love to read them. I just want to say thank you to V for sharing Hood Healing. It seems like I've started reading. It's a really good read. And I'm making so many, I'm having my own aha moments as I read the book. So I just want to thank you for
okay.
writing the book and for being a guest for us today and sharing your experience and how you hope the hood healing will help others. So we really appreciate you sharing that with us today. So thank you, V.
Thank you
We can
guys.
go to the next one. We got some good ones. We got amplified meditation and
I love
yoga,
it. You heard me.
amplify educating
Yeah.
ourselves. There is a poll. If you guys take a moment and complete the poll for us, please, before we close out.
You guys are
Hashtag,
wonderful.
yeah, hashtag
Honesty.
amplify honesty. Fantastic. Okay,
Educating ourselves.
I think we can go to the next slide, D. Thank you. Remember that you can create conversations, the More Perfect Union Parent Cafe in a Box. This cafe speaks especially to social justice issues. So if you've never been to a More Perfect Union, it covers things like police brutality and parents of children with special needs and immigration and LGBTQIA. So if you've never experienced that, you want to get you a deck and join us at an upcoming cafe on Friday, where we sometimes cover or have, host cafes. Oh, cool. This Friday is a More Perfect Union Cafe. Yay! So come through with us and visit us. All right, next slide. Thank you, Kathy. Taste the Cafes. Yay! This Friday, 12 o'clock. Some More Perfect Union. Join us, join us, join us. If you talk about having transformative conversations and having aha moments and conversations that heal, this is where you want to be at a Taste of More Perfect Union Parent Cafe. It's a great opportunity to lean in to discomfort so you can disrupt, dismantle, grow, expand, all those great things and learn about someone different from you. So tomorrow and then Friday we have the Taste of Perfect Cafe, and don't forget our Spanish Cafe is tomorrow. And Vanita, I see you saying something. Fantastic. All right, so remember to follow us on YouTube. This link, this video or this webinar, and all of our webinars from our daily webinars are located on our YouTube in both Spanish and English. So follow us on YouTube. You can share this link, today's video, with all of your friends and family, your network. Okay, spread the word, Hood Healing. We're also going to have a gift for some of you guys who joined today. Thank you, V.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
guys.
much. Thank you,
Thank
Kathy.
you
Thank you, Marilyn.
guys.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
It
Is
was
that it, D?
wonderful.
That's all the slides I got.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Vee, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
I will definitely be back. And by then I'll be talking about hood healing too. So I'm super excited. And I can't wait to connect with you all again at Be Strong Family. Thank you so much for this time.
No problem. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day, Vee. I'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Dee.
Yep. Thank you. I'll be closing out, everyone.
Okay.